Hello, this is Joshua for Frost Dragon Designs, and today I'd like to talk to you about my Astral Dragon Hard Enamel pin. This pin was originally part of Series 4 of my larger Black Cat RPG project. Now let's get into the design. Dragons are kind of like the quintessential monster within many fantasy universes. You know, The Hobbit had Smaug, they call it Dungeons and Dragons. There's dragons in Game of Thrones. Dragons are everywhere. They're kind of a big deal. I've designed a number of dragon pins over the years. Some of them are cute, some of them are tiny. This one's huge. Probably wouldn't be considered cute. The idea for this pin was I wanted a large dragon pin that was as close to scale with the kitty characters from Black Cat RPG as I could get. I wanted people to be able to hold this pin next to pretty much any of the character type pins from Black Cat RPG and to feel like, yes, this was a large, powerful creature. And the reason I wanted that big size was because when I held up the Bone Dragon from Series 3, when I held that next to some of the adventurers from Series 3 for Black Cat RPG, it looked cool, it looked menacing, it looked evil, but it didn't have the huge size and power in the look of it that I had been imagining, that I was expecting while I was designing it. And so the whole goal of this particular pin was I wanted it to feel big, I wanted it to feel huge, I wanted it to feel like it was a big adversary for the kitty adventurers. This is easily the largest pin that I have designed and released to date. It's 4.5 inches from the upper tip of his wing down to the tip of his mouth, beak, maw, whatever we're calling that, his face. In contrast, the smallest dragons I've ever produced and designed were a little under 1/2 inch, and they were the micro dragons from Black Cat RPG Series 1. So that was my smallest dragon, but as I said, this is my biggest dragon. This is 4.5 inches. Now, when you think 4.5 inches, you're like, okay, that's not so big. But then when you think it's an enamel pin, and you're like, oh, that's quite big. That's like much bigger than the palm of your hand. And in fact, the comment I've gotten most about this pin from people who have purchased it is, it was much bigger than I was expecting. You know, I have a picture in the listing of it next to a ruler. I say what the size of it is, but consistently, that's the comment that people say first. It was much bigger than I expected, and then they say that they loved it. So that's always the fun part. Now, as for me as an artist, as a designer, dragons terrify me. Not because I think they're real, but because they're real hard to draw. They're real hard to design. And sometimes I think to myself, well, how is it hard to draw or design something that doesn't exist? If it doesn't exist, then you should be able to make it up as you go along. But there's the catch. Because dragons are so important to fantasy settings in general, there have been many illustrations of them over the years. And many people have kind of these fixed concepts in their head as to what a dragon, quote, should look like, unquote. And obviously, I have my own fixed concepts of what a dragon should look like. I personally like dragons who have 2 hind legs, and then their 4 limbs are the wings. But I chose to illustrate this one as being, 6-limbed, because he's got 4 paws, hind legs, and then the limbs that make up the wings. Because, like bats, dragon wings are in fact limbs. They're basically arms with elongated fingers with webbing going between those fingers. And so I chose to depict it as a 6-limbed dragon because that's what a lot of people expect in a fantasy setting. And, I've done the other kind that I prefer, but I figured for this, I would go ahead and do the 6-limbed one. But the challenge that I often come up with is that it's really hard to figure out how all those limbs would attach to the torso. There's no real good model for this in nature. Anything that's got more than 4 limbs, and we're not counting tails in this sense, but anything that's got more than 4 limbs, has an exoskeleton. We don't have anything with internal skeletons that match this concept. So I can't really look to nature and say, ah, here's the anatomy that I'm going to, emulate when creating this dragon. So it's kind of got a big challenge to it, and I'm always a little terrified when I start working on a dragon, and I don't think I've ever done two types of dragons, with the exact same anatomy. I mean, even if you go back and look at Black Hat RPG Series 3, I have a fairly large 2.5-inch bone dragon. And while I did in fact steal the bone dragon's skull and repurpose it in this astral dragon, the rest of the anatomy is fairly dissimilar. And I mean that from like an artist and a design standpoint. I mean, they both look like dragons. So it's not like they look completely different, but when you're looking at it from an anatomy standpoint, they're not as closely related as you might think. So I'm still trying to find a dragon anatomy that I really like, but this is pretty good, honestly. Anyway, if you enjoyed watching me design this pin, if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and hearing me talk about things, please go ahead and like and subscribe. I release a new video at least once a week, and I would love to have you along for the next one. So thank you so much for your time, and have a fantastic rest of your day.